The morning sun cast long shadows across New Haven Colony as 8-year-old Lucy Morrison walked to school with her backpack bouncing against her small frame. She loved these quiet walks through the settlement where her father worked as the defense commander. The air smelled of fresh earth and the strange purple flowers that grew wild around the human buildings. Lucy always stopped to pet the colony dogs that wandered freely through the streets, their tails wagging as they recognized her gentle touch. New Haven sat on the surface of Kepler 442b, like a small jewel among the rolling hills and crystal formations that made this planet so valuable to human miners. 3,000 people called this place home, building their lives around the rare minerals buried deep in the ground. The colonists had worked hard to make their settlement feel like Earth, with parks where children could play and gardens where families grew vegetables from seeds brought across the stars. Colonel Jake Morrison stood in the command center reviewing the morning reports when his communication officer, Lieutenant Gary Chun, handed him a datapad with an urgent message. The words on the screen made Jake's blood run cold. 3 alien military bases had been completely destroyed in the past month, and survivors spoke of something they called the Warbeast. The reports described a creature of impossible size and strength that killed everything in its path without mercy or reason. Dr. Elena Rodriguez worked in her laboratory studying samples of local wildlife when the emergency alert sounded through the colony. She had spent 5 years on Kepler 442b cataloging the planet's strange animals and plants, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for the reports flooding in from across the galaxy. The Warbeast was unlike any creature she had ever studied. According to the scattered data, it stood 12 feet tall with black armor-like skin that could deflect energy weapons and claws, sharp enough to cut through starship hulls. Lucy sat in her classroom listening to Mrs. Katie Walsh explain the history of human space travel when the school's emergency lights began flashing. The children looked around nervously as their teacher received a message on her communication device. Mrs. Walsh tried to keep her voice calm as she told the students they would be having an early dismissal today. Lucy gathered her books and wondered why all the adults suddenly looked so worried. The Zephyrian Empire had ruled this sector of space for over 200 years with their advanced weapons and warrior culture. Their soldiers were feared throughout the galaxy for their skill in battle and their refusal to surrender. When reports reached their command that something had wiped out an entire Zephyrian battle station in less than 4 hours, panic spread through their ranks like wildfire. The few survivors described a creature that moved through their corridors like death itself, hunting down trained warriors as if they were helpless children. Captain Rex Sullivan guided his merchant ship Aurora's Dream through hyperspace carrying a cargo of medical supplies and farming equipment for colonies on the outer rim. His crew of 12 had made this run dozens of times without incident. Rex trusted his engineer Peter Grant to keep the engines running smooth and his medic Danny Kim to patch up any injuries from the rough work of loading and unloading cargo. None of them had ever seen anything like the massive shape that appeared on their sensors as they dropped out of hyperspace near the Kepler system. Colonel Morrison called an emergency meeting with his senior staff as more reports arrived about the Warbeast's movements. The creature seemed to target military installations and command centers with frightening intelligence. It didn't attack randomly like a wild animal, but chose its targets with the precision of a trained soldier. The beast had destroyed a Centauri defense platform by targeting its power core first, then systematically hunting down the crew. As they tried to escape in life pods, Lucy walked home from school through streets filled with worried adults speaking in hushed voices. She noticed that more soldiers than usual were patrolling the colony and setting up barriers around important buildings. Her friend Amy Kim waved to her from across the street where she stood with her parents, Dr. Linda Kim and mechanic Steve Kim. The adults were discussing something serious while the children watched with curious eyes. Dr. Rodriguez studied the fragmentary data about the Warbeast with growing alarm. The creature's behavior patterns suggested intelligence that rivaled human levels, but combined with instincts that were purely predatory. It seemed to take pleasure in the fear of its victims, stalking them through damaged ships and stations before making the final kill. Most disturbing were reports that it could survive in the vacuum of space without any protection, making it nearly impossible to contain or escape. The emergency session in the Colonial Council chambers lasted until well past sunset. Mayor Frank Cooper listened as Colonel Morrison explained their limited defensive capabilities against a threat that had defeated forces much larger and better equipped than their small mining colony. Sergeant Maria Santos reported that their energy weapons and protective barriers were designed to handle local wildlife and occasional pirates, not a creature that could tear apart military installations with its bare hands. Lucy sat at the dinner table with her father as he tried to explain why the colony might need to evacuate soon. She listened carefully as he told her about a dangerous animal that was moving through their part of space, destroying everything in its path. Lucy asked if it was like the wild cats that sometimes wandered too close to the settlement, and her father paused before saying it was much bigger and much more dangerous than any animal she had ever seen. Long-range sensors detected an unknown vessel approaching the Kepler system as the colony prepared for possible evacuation. The ship's trajectory was erratic and it appeared to be damaged, with hull breaches visible on the scanner readings. Colonel Morrison ordered his patrol ships to maintain a safe distance as the unknown vessel continued its approach to Kepler 442b. The ship's communication systems were either damaged or the crew was unable to respond to repeated attempts at contact. Night fell over New Haven as families packed their most precious belongings and prepared for a possible emergency departure. Transport ships sat ready on the landing pads while parents tried to keep their children calm despite the fear that filled the adult conversations. Lucy helped her father check their emergency supplies while asking questions about where they might go. If they had to leave their home, the unknown ship crashed into the outer perimeter of New Haven just after midnight, its emergency beacons flashing. Weakly in the darkness, rescue teams rushed to the crash site and found 3 survivors, stumbling through the wreckage with injuries and tales of horror that confirmed the colonists' worst fears. The Warbeast had found them, and their peaceful mining colony was about to become its next hunting ground. Captain Rex Sullivan stumbled through the twisted metal of his crashed ship with blood running down his face and terror filling his eyes. Behind him, Engineer Peter Grant helped support medic Danny Kim, who had suffered a broken leg during the crash landing. The 3 men moved as quickly as they could toward the lights of New Haven Colony, looking over their shoulders every few seconds as if expecting death to follow them through the darkness. Dr. Elena Rodriguez received the emergency call just as she was preparing for bed and rushed to the medical center still wearing her pajamas under a hastily thrown-on lab coat. She found the 3 survivors sitting in the treatment room with injuries that spoke of violence rather than accident. Deep claw marks ran across Captain Sullivan's back and arms while Peter Grant's hands shook uncontrollably as he tried to drink a cup of water. Colonel Jake Morrison arrived at the medical center within minutes of the crash report and listened with growing horror as Captain Sullivan described what had happened to the Aurora's dream. The merchant captain's voice broke as he told of how something had torn through their ship's hull with its bare hands and then stalked his crew through the corridors like a hunter playing with its prey. The creature had boarded their ship through a hole it created by simply punching through the reinforced steel plating that was supposed to protect them from space debris and small weapons fire. Captain Sullivan described how the Warbeast moved through their vessel with the confidence of something that had never known fear or doubt. It killed his crew members one by one, taking its time and seeming to enjoy their terror before delivering the final blow. Lucy Morrison woke to the sound of her father's communication device buzzing urgently in the next room. She could hear him speaking in the low, serious voice he used when something important was happening at the colony. Through her bedroom window, she could see lights moving around the medical center and people hurrying through the streets despite the late hour. Engineer Peter Grant fought to control his shaking hands as he described how the Warbeast had cornered him in the engine room of their ship. The creature stood 14 feet tall with skin like black metal and eyes that glowed red in the darkness. Its hands were almost human in shape, but each finger ended in claws that could slice through steel like paper. Peter had hidden behind a power coupling for 3 hours while the monster searched for him, making sounds like a predator that was enjoying the hunt. Dr. Rodriguez worked quickly to treat the survivors' physical injuries while trying to gather as much information as possible about their attacker. The claw marks on Captain Sullivan's back were unlike anything she had seen from local wildlife. They were too precise and too deep, made by something that possessed both incredible strength and the intelligence to know exactly where to strike. For maximum damage, medic Danny Kim spoke in whispers about the sounds the Warbeast made as it moved through their ship. It didn't roar or growl like a wild animal, but made clicking noises with its teeth, and what sounded almost like laughter when it found a hiding place where someone had tried to escape. The creature seemed to understand that fear made the hunt more enjoyable and deliberately drew out the terror of its victims. The emergency council meeting that followed lasted until dawn as colony leaders tried to process the reality of their situation. Mayor Frank Cooper listened as military experts explained that their small defense force was equipped to handle pirates and wildlife, not something that could destroy military installations single-handedly. Their energy weapons might slow the creature down, but according to all reports, nothing had been able to actually stop it. Captain Sullivan described how the Warbeast had seemed to study their ship's layout before beginning its attack, as if it was learning the best way to trap and corner the crew. The creature moved with purpose and intelligence that suggested it was more than just a mindless killing machine. It planned its attacks and adapted its tactics based on how its victims tried to defend themselves. Lucy sat at the breakfast table the next morning listening to her father explain why she wouldn't be going to school today. All the children in the colony were being kept close to their families while the adults decided what to do about the dangerous creature that might be coming their way. She could see soldiers setting up barriers and weapons around important buildings. Through their kitchen window, Dr. Rodriguez studied the biological samples she had collected from the survivors' injuries and made disturbing discoveries about their attacker. The creature's claws contained traces of metals that didn't occur naturally on any known planet, suggesting it was artificially created rather than naturally evolved. The precision of the wounds indicated intelligence and control that went far beyond simple animal instinct. Sergeant Maria Santos coordinated the colony's defensive preparations while knowing in her heart that they were probably useless against something that had defeated trained military forces. The patrol teams reported strange readings on their motion sensors around the crash site, as if something large was moving through the area but staying just out of sight. Engineer Peter Grant couldn't stop his hands from shaking as he described the moment when the Warbeast had almost found his hiding place. The creature had stood just inches away from him, sniffing the air like a hunting dog following a scent trail. Its breathing sounded mechanical and wrong, as if something artificial was pumping air through lungs that weren't quite built for the job. The afternoon brought reports from the outer sensor stations that something was moving through the hills surrounding New Haven Colony. The readings suggested a single large creature traveling in a pattern that seemed designed to scout their defenses and find the best approach routes. Whatever was out there was taking its time and studying them just as it had studied the Auroras. Dream before attacking, Lucy helped her friend Amy Kim gather toys and clothes to pack in case their families needed to leave quickly. The two girls tried to stay cheerful despite the worried expressions on every adult face they saw. Amy asked if the dangerous animal would hurt their pets, and Lucy promised that her father wouldn't let anything bad happen to the colony dogs and cats. As darkness fell over New Haven, the outer perimeter alarms began sounding in a pattern that meant something was testing their defenses. Security cameras caught glimpses of movement in the shadows between buildings, but nothing clear enough to identify. The Warbeast had arrived and begun the careful stalking process that had preceded every one of its previous attacks. The first signs of the Warbeast's presence came with the morning light as colonists discovered that their outer defense towers had been systematically destroyed during the night. The massive metal structures lay twisted and broken as if something incredibly strong had simply pulled them apart with its bare hands. Colonel Jake Morrison stood among the wreckage with his engineering team trying to understand how anything could cause such destruction without making enough noise to wake the entire colony. Lucy Morrison ate her breakfast while watching her father pace back and forth in their kitchen as he spoke urgently into his communication device. She could tell from his voice that whatever was happening was much worse than he had explained to her the night before. Outside their window, she could see families loading their belongings into vehicles and heading toward the spaceport where the transport ships waited. Dr. Elena Rodriguez examined the destroyed defense towers with her portable scanner and made a chilling discovery about their attacker. The metal had been torn apart by something with incredible precision rather than random violence. Each tower had been disabled by targeting specific weak points in the structure, suggesting the creature possessed detailed knowledge of human engineering and construction methods. The evacuation order came at noon as reports flooded in from the perimeter stations that something large was moving closer to the colony center. Mayor Frank Cooper made the announcement over the colony's communication system, trying to keep his voice calm as he told 3,000 people. They had 2 hours to gather their most important possessions and report to the spaceport for immediate departure. Engineer Peter Grant helped load emergency supplies onto the transport ships, while constantly looking over his shoulder for signs of the creature that had destroyed his previous vessel. His hands still shook whenever he thought about those glowing red eyes and the sound of claws scraping against metal. He kept telling other colonists to hurry because he knew the Warbeast was playing with them, letting them think they might escape before closing the trap. The Kim family worked together to pack their belongings as quickly as possible while 10-year-old Danny Kim helped his younger sister Amy carry her favorite toys to their family transport. Dr. Linda Kim coordinated with other medical personnel to ensure all patients could be safely moved while mechanic Steve Kim checked and rechecked their vehicle's engine systems. None of them spoke about what might happen if they didn't reach the spaceport in time. Lieutenant Gary Chun organized the rear guard action that would cover the evacuation, knowing it was probably a suicide mission but determined to give the families as much time as possible to escape. Sergeant Maria Santos distributed the colony's best weapons to volunteers who had agreed to stay behind and slow down whatever was hunting them. Most of the volunteers were parents who wanted to make sure their children reached safety even if they didn't survive themselves. Lucy packed her small backpack with clothes and the wooden horse her grandfather had carved for her before the family left Earth 5 years ago. She could hear the fear in her father's voice when he thought she wasn't listening and see the worry lines around his eyes that hadn't been there yesterday. When she asked if they would ever come back to New Haven, he hugged her tightly and said he hoped so, but couldn't make any promises. The first direct sighting of the Warbeast came from Scout Team Alpha positioned on the hill overlooking the colony's eastern approach. Corporal Lisa Brown reported, a massive black shape moving between the crystal formations with a grace that seemed impossible for something so large. Through her binoculars, she could see it was even bigger than the survivors had described, standing nearly 15 feet tall with arms that reached almost to the ground. Dr. Rodriguez monitored the creature's approach using the colony's remaining sensor equipment and realized it was deliberately allowing itself to be seen. The Warbeast was no longer hiding its presence because it wanted the colonists to know it was coming. This psychological warfare suggested intelligence that went far beyond animal cunning and into the realm of military strategy. The evacuation proceeded in organized chaos as families streamed toward the spaceport carrying children and elderly relatives while transport pilots prepared their ships for immediate departure. Captain Sullivan supervised the loading despite his own injuries, determined to help save as many people as possible since he had failed to protect his own crew. The first transport lifted off successfully just as motion sensors detected the creature entering the colony's outer residential areas. Amy Kim cried as her family's transport vehicle broke down halfway to the spaceport, forcing them to abandon their belongings and continue on foot. Danny Kim carried his sister on his back, while their parents grabbed only the most essential supplies. Around them, other families faced similar emergencies as vehicles overloaded with possessions and people began failing under the stress of the hasty evacuation. Sergeant Santos positioned her defense team at strategic points around the spaceport. while knowing their energy weapons would probably be useless against something that had shrugged off military-grade firepower. The soldiers checked and rechecked their equipment more out of nervous habit than any belief it would make a difference. They had all heard the survivors' descriptions of claws that could slice through ship hulls, and armor plating. The Warbeast finally revealed itself completely as it emerged from behind a row of storage buildings just 500 meters from the spaceport. Lucy Morrison saw it first as her father carried her toward their assigned transport ship, and the sight made her stop breathing for a moment. The creature was like something from her worst nightmares, but worse because it was real and moving toward them with terrible purpose. The monster stood on two legs, like a person, but was built like a machine designed for killing. Its black skin gleamed like polished metal in the sunlight, while muscles moved beneath the surface with power that could tear apart buildings. The head was elongated and predatory, with eyes that burned red like coals in a fire. Most frightening were its hands, which looked almost human except for the long claws that extended from each finger. Colonel Morrison ordered his remaining soldiers to open fire as the Warbeast began walking toward the fleeing colonists with the patient stride of something that knew its prey couldn't escape. Energy beams struck the creature's chest and arms, but seemed to have no effect except to make it turn its terrible gaze toward the defense positions. The monster's mouth opened in what might have been amusement, revealing rows of teeth designed for tearing flesh from bone. The creature moved faster than anything that large should have been able to move, covering the distance to the first defense position in seconds that felt like hours to the terrified soldiers. Lieutenant Chen emptied his weapon's power cell directly into the Warbeast's face and watched in horror as it simply brushed off the attack like an annoying insect. The monster reached out with one clawed hand and lifted the lieutenant off the ground as easily as Lucy might pick up one of her dolls. The Warbeast dropped Lieutenant Chun's lifeless body and turned its burning red eyes toward the crowd of families trying to reach the transport ships. The creature moved through the remaining defense positions like death itself, swatting aside soldiers and crushing their weapons with casual indifference. Sergeant Maria Santos emptied 3 power cells into the monster's back and watched in despair as it didn't even slow down its methodical advance toward the civilians. Colonel Jake Morrison found himself separated from the main evacuation group when a transport ship exploded under the creature's claws, sending burning debris across the spaceport landing area. He rolled behind a cargo container with his sidearm drawn, knowing the small energy weapon was useless but unable to simply give up while his people were dying around him. Through the smoke and chaos, he could see families running in panic as the Warbeast selected its next targets with predatory patience. Lucy Morrison had been helping Amy Kim walk toward the transport ships when the explosion knocked both girls to the ground and filled the air with smoke and screaming voices. She got to her feet and looked around for her father, but could only see people running in different directions while the massive black shape of the creature moved among them like a nightmare come to life. Amy was crying and calling for her parents, who had disappeared somewhere in the confusion. Dr. Elena Rodriguez crouched behind her research equipment near the edge of the spaceport and continued scanning the Warbeast, even as it systematically destroyed everything around her. Her readings showed brain activity that defied everything science knew about predatory behavior. The creature wasn't just hunting for food or territory, but seemed to be studying human responses to fear and trying to maximize their terror before killing them. The monster caught Captain Sullivan as he tried to help load injured civilians onto a medical transport and lifted the merchant captain into the air with one massive hand. Sullivan looked into those glowing red eyes and saw intelligence. That was far more frightening than simple animal hunger. The Warbeast held him for a long moment as if deciding whether his death would be quick or slow, then squeezed until Sullivan's ribs cracked audibly. Danny Kim searched frantically through the smoke and debris for his sister Amy while explosions and weapons fire echoed around the spaceport. He found her sitting next to Lucy Morrison behind an overturned cargo hauler, both girls holding hands and trying not to cry as the sounds of battle grew closer. Danny grabbed both children and started looking for a way to reach the transport ships that were still attempting to evacuate survivors. The Warbeast seemed to take pleasure in the chaos it had created as it moved from group to group of trapped colonists, killing some immediately while leaving others alive to spread more fear among the survivors. Dr. Rodriguez realized the creature was displaying behavior patterns, similar to certain pack hunters that use terror as a weapon to scatter prey and make them easier to catch individually. Colonel Morrison worked his way through the wreckage toward the central landing pad where he could see the largest group of civilians trapped between burning transport ships and the advancing monster. His communication device crackled with desperate reports from his remaining soldiers, but their weapons had proven completely ineffective against something that seemed immune to energy discharge and physical trauma. Lucy Morrison watched the Warbeast kill Sergeant Santos with a single swipe of its claws and felt something inside her chest that was different from fear. She had spent her 8 years of life around animals of all kinds, from the colony's guard dogs to the wild creatures that Dr. Rodriguez studied in her laboratory. Something about the way the monster moved reminded her of the aggressive animals that sometimes attacked the settlement's livestock. The creature cornered Mayor Frank Cooper and his family near the administration building, moving with the slow confidence of a predator that knew its prey had nowhere left to run. Cooper pushed his wife and children behind him and raised his hands in a futile gesture of surrender. But the Warbeast simply reached out and knocked him aside like he weighed nothing at all. Amy Kim pointed through the smoke toward a figure she recognized and whispered to Lucy that she could see Colonel Morrison trapped against a pile of debris about 50 meters away. The girls watched as the Warbeast finished with its current victims and turned its attention toward Lucy's father, who was trying to reload his weapon with hands that shook from exhaustion and despair. Dr. Rodriguez made a final desperate scan of the creature and discovered something in its brain chemistry that made her gasp with sudden understanding. Buried beneath the artificial programming and enhanced aggression were neural patterns that resembled the pack-bonding behaviors found in domesticated animals. The Warbeast had been created using base genetic material from creatures that had evolved alongside intelligent species. The monster approached Colonel Morrison with deliberate slowness, savoring the fear and helplessness of someone who had tried to organize resistance against it. Morrison backed against the debris pile and raised his useless weapon, knowing he was about to die but determined to face his end with dignity. The creature's claws extended fully as it prepared to add another victim to the carnage. Scattered across the spaceport. Lucy Morrison stood up from behind the cargo hauler and started walking toward the Warbeast and her trapped father despite Danny Kim's desperate attempts to hold her back. The 8-year-old girl moved through the smoke and destruction with the same calm confidence she showed when approaching frightened animals around the colony. She could see that the monster was bigger and more dangerous than anything she had ever encountered. But something deep in her mind recognized patterns of behavior that seemed familiar. The Warbeast paused in its approach toward Colonel Morrison as it noticed the small human child walking directly toward it without any sign of fear or attempt to flee. The creature turned its massive head to study this unexpected development, its glowing red eyes focusing on Lucy with the intensity of a predator trying to understand prey behavior. That didn't match its programmed expectations. Dr. Rodriguez watched through her scanner as the creature's brain activity shifted dramatically when it detected Lucy's approach. Stress hormones that had been elevated during the hunt began dropping while other neural pathways activated in patterns she had never seen before. The child was triggering responses in the Warbeast that seemed to bypass all its artificial programming and reach something much deeper. Lucy stopped walking when she was close enough to see the details of the creature's face and the intelligence burning in those terrible red eyes. She looked up at the monster that had killed so many people and destroyed her home, then planted her feet firmly and spoke with the absolute authority of a child who had never doubted that animals would obey her commands. Lucy Morrison looked directly into the burning red eyes of the galaxy's most feared creature and spoke a single word with all the authority her 8-year-old voice could carry. "Sit," she said firmly, the same way she had commanded countless animals around the colony when they misbehaved or got too excited. The word cut through the smoke and chaos of the destroyed spaceport. Like a blade of pure certainty, the effect was immediate and impossible. The Warbeast, which had never shown submission to any force in the known galaxy, slowly lowered its massive frame until it rested on its haunches like an obedient dog. Its glowing eyes remained fixed on Lucy's face, but all the predatory tension drained from its posture as if someone had flipped a switch deep inside its artificial brain. Colonel Jake Morrison stared in complete disbelief as his 8-year-old daughter stood calmly in front of the seated monster that had just finished slaughtering dozens of trained soldiers. The creature that moments before had been an unstoppable killing machine now sat quietly like one of the colony's guard dogs waiting for its next command. Jake's hands shook as he lowered his useless weapon and tried to understand what his eyes were telling him. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched her scanner. Readings changed dramatically as the Warbeast's brain chemistry shifted into patterns she had never seen in any predatory species. Stress hormones that had been flooding the creature's system during its hunt dropped to almost nothing, while regions associated with pack bonding and social submission activated for the first time since her scans began. Whatever Lucy had done, it had reached programming buried so deep that even the creature's creators had forgotten it existed. The spaceport fell silent except for the crackling of fires and the distant sound of transport engines as the few remaining ships lifted off with survivors. Colonists who had been running for their lives stopped and turned to stare at the impossible sight of the galaxy's ultimate weapon sitting obediently before a small human child. Some thought they were hallucinating from shock until others confirmed they were seeing the same thing. Lucy stepped closer to the Warbeast and reached out to touch the armored skin of its massive arm. The creature remained perfectly still as her small hand explored the scars and metal-like texture of its hide. She had done the same thing with injured animals that Dr. Rodriguez brought to the colony medical center, using gentle touch to calm them while the adults figured out how to help them heal. Danny Kim crept out from behind the cargo hauler with his sister Amy close behind him, both children staring in amazement at Lucy and the seated monster. Amy whispered that it looked like Lucy was petting a giant dog, and Danny had to admit that was exactly what it looked like, despite knowing this creature had just destroyed half their colony and killed dozens of people. The Warbeast's breathing slowed and deepened as Lucy continued her gentle examination of its wounds and scars. Dr. Rodriguez noted that the creature's vital signs were approaching something resembling contentment, a state that seemed impossible for something engineered to be a perfect killing machine. The monster's claws retracted completely for the first time since her observations began. Captain Rex Sullivan crawled out from under the wreckage of a transport ship with blood running down his face and stared at the scene before him in shock. The creature that had torn apart his ship and murdered his crew was now sitting peacefully while a little girl examined its injuries like a veterinarian checking a sick animal. Sullivan rubbed his eyes to make sure he wasn't dreaming or dying from his wounds. Dr. Rodriguez approached slowly with her scanner still running, desperate to understand what was happening from a scientific perspective. The Warbeast noticed her movement but made no aggressive gestures, seeming to understand that Lucy had accepted the doctor's presence. Rodriguez realized the creature was now following the same social hierarchy rules that govern pack animals. With Lucy clearly established as the dominant member, Lucy looked up at the massive head towering above her and spoke again in the same firm but gentle voice she used with all animals. "Good," she said simply, and the creature's mouth opened slightly in what might have been the first expression of pleasure it had ever shown. The sound it made was nothing like the terrifying clicks and growls the survivors had described, but rather a soft rumbling that reminded everyone of a very large cat purring. Colonel Morrison finally found his voice and called softly to his daughter, afraid that any sudden movement might break whatever spell she had cast over the monster. Lucy turned and waved to him with a smile, then patted the Warbeast's arm and told it to stay before walking back toward her father. The creature remained seated exactly where she had left it, watching her movements with the devoted attention of a loyal pet. The news of what had happened at New Haven spread across the galaxy faster than hyperspace travel as survivors shared their impossible stories with anyone who would listen. Xenobiologists from dozens of species requested permission to study the tamed Warbeast while military commanders tried to understand how their most advanced weapons had failed where a child's voice had succeeded. Dr. Rodriguez spent the following weeks working with Lucy to understand the creature's new behavior patterns. The Warbeast responded to simple commands from the girl and seemed genuinely content for the first time in its artificial existence. Scans revealed that the violent programming conflicts that had driven its aggressive behavior were no longer active, replaced by the pack-bonding instincts that had been buried beneath layers of military conditioning. Lucy named the creature Max because she said he reminded her of a dog her grandfather had owned back on Earth. Max followed her around the rebuilt colony like a devoted guardian, ignoring the fearful stares of adults who still remembered the destruction he had caused. The creature that had once inspired terror across multiple star systems now waited patiently outside the school building while Lucy attended her classes. The Galactic Council sent delegations to study the phenomenon and tried to understand how human pack-bonding instincts had overcome alien military engineering. Dr. Rodriguez published papers suggesting that the most advanced weapons could be defeated not by superior force, but by recognizing the basic needs that drove all living creatures, even artificial ones. Years later, visitors to New Haven would find Lucy Morrison walking to school with her homework in one hand and the other resting on the armored head of her enormous companion. Max had found peace in the simple role of protecting one small human girl, while Lucy had learned that sometimes the most powerful act of dominance was showing kindness to something that had never experienced it before. The Warbeast that had once feared nothing learned to fear disappointing the child who had given him purpose. And the galaxy learned that humanity's greatest strength was not their weapons or technology, but their ability to see the potential for good in even the most broken and dangerous creatures.